Hello, and welcome to You Should Hear This, a podcast for the Everyday Association Professional. I'm Chris Beeman, your host. Are you scrolling through your social media feed, seeing new trends pop up, and ever wondered how you can stay ahead of these trends for your association? Associations have a habit of history and repeat. Almost, why fix something that doesn't need fixing? In order for us as association professionals to keep our members engaged, we need to also stay on top of trends that are coming down the pipeline and stay relevant. Our guest today will be able to provide us insight on what is in store for the future, how we can plan for these, and so much more. Dean West, president of Association Laboratory, has made significant contributions to the association industry through his research-based insights and expertise in association strategy and leadership. For more than 20 years, he has conducted extensive research into what works and what doesn't in association management, providing valuable guidance and advice to association leaders around the world. He is widely recognized as a thought leader and futurist in the industry, and his work has helped countless associations navigate the complex and dynamic environment in which they operate. In addition to his research and consulting work, Mr. West has also served in various leadership positions within professional associations, further contributing to the industry's knowledge base and promoting best practices. Through his company, Association Laboratory, Inc., he continues to provide strategy advice, association sector research, and strategic education and guidance to associations of all types and sizes, further advancing the field and helping organizations achieve their goals. Welcome, Dean.
Thanks for having me, Chris. I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So to get us started for our listeners, could you tell us a little bit, I know I just read the bio, but could you tell us a little bit about your background and also maybe dive into why you're so passionate about this area?
Sure. I began my association career because my father was a politician, suggested I become a lobbyist. So I became a lobbyist at the state level and then eventually became an assistant executive director and then an executive director twice. And one of the things that just struck me, frankly, was how interesting the profession was. I remember having a conversation with a friend who was working for Procter & Gamble at the time when I worked for the American Society of Clinical Oncology. And he went on and on about, branding and food products and all the stuff you would talk about at Procter & Gamble. But it struck me later that evening when I was kind of enjoying a nightcap at my hotel that at the end of the day, he was selling soap and I was curing cancer. And that was a lot more fun to be involved with. So I have met people from all over the world. I have worked all over the world, opportunities I never anticipated growing up in a small town in central Iowa, all because of the profession. So it's an outstanding place to work, an outstanding place to meet and get to know people better.
Dean, I have to ask, what's the most interesting association you've worked with or you've heard of?
Well, the most one I've heard of was the American Sunbathing Association, which was nudists. And,
okay.
I and a colleague of mine were debating where we'd get our name badges during the pitch to them, as an example. So we eventually did not pitch it. My boss at the time thought that would have a negative impact on my career. He and I had very different concepts of what a career path should look like.
I love it. So we're talking today about future of associations and trends, and the word trend itself is something that I feel like we kind of throw around. I'm curious, how do you define trend and so break it down for us, and why is it important for associations to have this idea and concept on our radar?
Sure. So what you do as any leader of any type of organization is design yourself to be successful at some future state. And so as a result of that, what you want to do is understand what that future looks like. Will things be more expensive or less expensive? How will technology change and people change? And one of the reasons you do that is so that you're constantly adapting to things before they happen and not reacting to them. So getting an understanding of how your business environment, your personal environment, your professional environment are changing gives you insight into how to make those changes. So trends are things that differ over time. And a really easy one would be price. Are prices trending up or trending down over time? Where people often make mistakes is they look at something that's different and consider it a trend. It's different this year. So when we do trend analysis as part of our sector research, for example, we don't change the topics that we study because what we're trying to find is how do these things differ over time? Is something becoming more prominent in the environment? Is something becoming less prominent? Is something becoming less predictable because the lines go up and down? So when you want to do trend analysis, what you're really trying to do is say, A, what are the issues that are to impact the professional environment, personal environment, the industry environment, however you define it. You want to establish those definitions because you can track changes in those definitions over time. And that allowing to see how your world changes allows you to develop better strategy, whether it's personal strategy for yourself as in your career or organizational strategy for your association.
And how would you, so when we think about future state, I guess I just, a quick anecdote. This morning I woke up and hopped on Facebook as per usual, and I'm a part of this association communication professionals group. And there's a big question out there right now. Are you rebranding your emails and website and stuff to match this new Twitter branding? Or are you just abandoning, which I think I read they're moving to X, or
Yes.
are you abandoning Twitter altogether and moving to Threads? Are you not even on social? And that's just a small example of something that has or is changing. How do associations, I guess the question is, how do associations keep track of all of those trends to identify that future state for the association? And, quite frankly, this could be a conversation in and of itself, but how do you not get burnt out on the constant changes and trends to watch? How can we compartmentalize some of that, I guess is what I'm asking.
If you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, those decisions become a lot easier. And I'll camp on your Twitter example. So we have our Twitter account at Association Laboratory and have for a number of years. We rarely post anything on it. Twitter is not particularly useful venue for us to reach our market, which are association CEOs. They don't use Twitter to identify and evaluate whether or not to hire someone. It's not how they buy. So if Twitter changes from Twitter to X, I'm effectively not impacted because we've made the decision that Twitter isn't important to our strategy. Okay. Facebook, taking a step back, is still important, but we use it on a very limited basis because it's only important for a tiny cadre of, we will diplomatically say, more senior association executives. People don't, and we use it only to generate awareness for certain things. We don't rely on it to generate leads for business. We don't rely on it for engagement with our audience. LinkedIn, we use frequently and intentionally because LinkedIn is how we communicate with a much broader market base on everything from, my blog, from my seat at the bar to new products to someone speaking somewhere, things of that nature. So LinkedIn, if LinkedIn changed something substantially, we would be more concerned about it, or con, because that's it's more of a vital link between us and the audience. Twitter, we don't care because it's not a vital link. So if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, that teaches you what it is you actually have to monitor and be more serious about. Another thing right now, they're changing the CAE, the credentials necessary to be a CAE provider. So we've reviewed that because we're a CAE provider. So that's providing education is a big part of what we do. And so if they make it more difficult for us, if they make it easier for us, whatever they do, that becomes very central. So the purpose of a good business plan, whether it's for you and your career, whether it's your association, whether it's for your consulting firm, is to help guide those prioritization decisions. And so for us, the Twitter change is meaningless. A similar LinkedIn change would be more important. But because it's important to us, it wouldn't be a burden to go through whatever those changes would be, a new logo and things of that nature.
Sure. It sounds like it's important to have a process to vet whether or not these trends are of importance to. Yeah. And, kind of along those lines, I mean, I'd love to dive in a little bit to this idea of strategic plans. So I'm on the board for a couple of local nonprofits to Central Indiana. And of course, I work for an organization that has a strategic plan. Some of them are out to 2030 at this point, Dean. And I guess I'm just, trends are popping up monthly at this point, right? I think when Chat GPT hit the market, within a month, every single association tech company out there is coming out with a webinar or a podcast or something to say, here's how your association can use it. I guarantee that wasn't on their strategic plan, right? So how do we balance these formalized strategic plans that, to your point, give us a process for vetting some of these trends with this temptation to jump on every new thing and figure out how we apply it to our industry?
So a little history. Old timey strategic plans used to be just task lists. Here's the things you want to get done. And Chris, you do this and you do that. And those have been out of date for 25 years. The next iteration of strategic planning was, I call them word cloud strategic plans. And you'll see words like innovative, our goals to be innovative and stuff like that. And people would hire a facilitator, basically get the board to agree on the word cloud. But for you and I on a staff level, our board would show up and say, our big strategic priority is innovation. Like, well, okay, what the hell does that mean? And so what I call a modern strategic plan is all about strategy, not about the document. And as an outsider, as a facilitator, when we do it, my goal is the more I talk, the worse I know things are going. It's how do we put people together and let them talk to each other? And so there should be clear statements of outcomes. There should be clear strategies linked to those outcomes. There should be a hierarchy of those goals and strategies. Okay. So it becomes a more useful document from a staff standpoint implementation. But, and now continuing forward, if I'm the board, the first component of that are the business assumptions behind the strategic plan. What does the future of our industry profession look like over the next 3 to 5 years? Let's say you get beyond 3 to 5 years, you're just speculating. Picture doing your strategic plan in 2019 and how confident you were of the future of the world. Okay. So, or AI, or there will be something unique to your industry, a regulatory change as an example, that nobody else knows or cares about, but fundamentally alters your business model. When we work with a bio-life science group on strategic planning, how they need to suddenly adapt to a very different environment on sharing data because of what they were trying to do during the pandemic. Okay. So the way you address that as a board or check as a person in your career is check back to those assumptions. So what a modern day board would do is revisit those business assumptions, let's say for 2 hours at each board meeting, and say, are these assumptions still valid? Yes. Or you'd say, no, the impact of AI on our sector is going to really fundamentally change things. Okay. Does that mean we have to do our goals different? Yes or no? Our strategies different? Yes or no? If yes, change the goal. If no, change, things of that nature. And so a modern day strategic plan is really just a starting. And then the strategic planning process never effectively ends. The cyclical process where perhaps every 3 years you do a more fundamental and deep dive into those issues, but you would discuss your strategic plan and the assumptions behind it in every board meeting. And that's how you adapt to something like AI. Because then if you're in accounting or engineering, it may have a dramatic impact. Or if you're in association management, it may have a dramatic impact. But I was just talking to a carpenter building a deck at my house. Doesn't impact him at all. He may have tools that help him design it, give me a better contract. So there may be some tools and stuff. But at the end of the day, somebody has to, pour the concrete into a posting and saw the lumber, and AI can't do that. So not everyone is impacted equally by trends. I think the last part of this, that oftentimes it's fun to, a little nerdy on you, Chris, my apologies. There are things that are interesting, but not particularly useful. And so one of the decisions when you do trend analysis and you apply those assumptions to your strategic planning process is, are these the business assumptions that are actually relevant to the people we serve? And I think where some associations are getting off track is they're becoming distracted by these macro issues, like global sustainability or climate change, which are important issues to discuss. But the farther you get from something that's directly relevant to the people you serve, the less likely they are to be engaged in it. And that's not to criticize it as an issue. It's that there's the natural human condition, which is, okay, if the association wants to work on this, good for them. Doesn't impact me. And so you want to be really careful that you don't get caught up in the hype of a particular issue. AI might be another example. We've all learned how to use tech tools. They all have challenges. They all provide opportunities for us. And it's easy to get caught up in the hype of AI. When at the end of the day, how does it impact your member in a way that's relevant to them, either pro and con?
So you've said a couple of things that strike me as interesting, and
only a couple. That was a crazy.
A few that we need to dive into. But yeah,
okay.
We're quite the other. In fact, I think first, just more of a reaction. Though never diagnosed, I'm a millennial and come from a generation where so many of us were diagnosed with ADHD and struggle with attention. And I think as we rise to leadership roles within our associations, I think it's something a trend also that I'm seeing, in that it's it's natural almost for us to get distracted with the next new thing that we've got to tackle. And I think focus can be, I'm generalizing and stereotyping, but I think focus can be a bit of a challenge. Well, I do admittedly wrestle a little bit with the notion, though, that associations shouldn't be paying attention to some of these global issues, because I think so many of our associations have these larger purposes and larger whys for why they exist. And so I'm very curious about your thoughts on how to prioritize some of those issues that we're tackling, right? Because I think at the end of the day, many of us believe if our association isn't helping to solve, let me use a specific example here. I used to work for a teachers association, and there was a conversation around sustainability and climate change. And if our teachers aren't teaching it, within their curriculum, we're not raising a generation to believe this is an issue that we've got to solve. And there is going to be no future for some of these students. So there's a big push. Sure. We've got to be teaching it. And so it's not necessarily the association's responsibility, but it's something that many of our board and some of our staff felt strongly about. So how do you determine, I guess, how do you consult with organizations to determine which of these large global political, social issues, societal issues, how do you prioritize which ones to tackle?
Well, there, you just hit the nail on the head. Your board and staff thought it was important.
Good point.
So when we do, for example, we have positioned association laboratories agnostic on these issues. We're not advocates for a thing. We're not opponents to anything. And the reason we've done that is because we were frustrated by the lack of an empirical approach to these questions. Okay. So if you're climate change, if you're the associate, it's AGU, I always get their name totally wrong, but they're basically an association of climate-oriented scientists. Okay. Climate science is fundamental to what they do. One of our clients is the Institute of Makers of Explosives. It's fundamental to them too, because of the regulatory restrictions things place on them. They're against many of those restrictions. So one of the mistakes we make, I think, is to lack an appreciation of the diversity of associations and the diversity of nuance of their roles in industries or professions, and the diversity of opinions within the people of those associations. And so to take a position that my board and staff thinks is important and critical basically says 12 people think it's critical. And so you may go out to your members and say, do you think it's important? And they'll say, yeah, as long as the stuff that is directly relevant to my needs is still addressed, do whatever you want. It's not my money. I'm giving you the same $300. But the more it takes the board's focus away from things that are directly relevant, the more you risk the relationship with all of your members, regardless of their views on the environment. Regardless of their views on the environment, they all still need CE credits, let's say, and that's directly relevant to maintaining a licensure and keeping their job. And because you've moved on and you're focused on some other issue that isn't directly relevant, maybe the quality of your education goes down, or some equivalent thing, or maybe your dues go up to fund some initiative that doesn't help them in any sort of way, and they'll say, well, this other group does great education, and I'm sure there's lots of ways to make that sustainable, that kind of thing. So what you do is you risk prioritizing resources away things that are more directly relevant. And logically speaking, the more you do that, the lower the quality of the directly relevant things that they want to participate in. And then I go back to this. Our struggle on environmental scanning, on our sector research, is to position the issues that are occurring in the environment as neutral. They're neither positive or negative. And I always use mergers and acquisitions. Okay, if someone buys my company and writes me a big check, M&A is a great thing. But if someone buys me, writes Dean a big check, then fire Chris Beeman, that's a negative thing to Chris. So it's all in your perspective. And there is not universal agreement on some of these issues the way people presume. There may be universal agreement that it's an issue, but not on the solution side of it. Okay, here's what we should do as a result. Or here's how it should impact this industry, this profession. And that's the hardest thing, is to be agnostic about these issues and not start from an opinion that gets reinforced, whatever it is you read, whatever it is you talk to. And because what that does is push you down a path that may be good, may not be good, but you can't see any other scenario. And most associations represent organizations and people with tremendously diverse viewpoints.
Mm-hmm.
and to make expensive long-term decisions based on the viewpoint of a few board members or staff, I think is a particularly good way to lose chunks of the folks who've historically relied on you for help, because there's nothing but people out there to serve them. They don't need you. The competition for association, time, money, and energy is astonishing. They don't need you the way a lot of folks think. And I think that's the danger when you start to take a particularly robust approach to what might be more of a macro issue, as opposed to, at the end of the day, I need 10 hours a year to maintain my licensure, and you're the best education. And so we use a physician, and I'll shut up. Chris, it's a long way. These are hard topics since we're discussing. If your quality of your education goes down because you're distracted by some other issue, you're helping to produce a physician. And if your mission is to produce a physician of high quality, you've abandoned that mission in favor of something that's less directly relevant. And every patient that physician treats is worse off as a result. So these decisions have hard impact. And I think many association boards get distracted by a media environment shouting at them that they have to pick a side. They have to do a thing. They have to agree with a group. But that's the media environment's incentive, because that's how you generate clicks, and clicks is how you generate money. So there's a financial incentive in the media environment to make you angry, because anger generates more clicks than happiness. And you just have to read any day of headlines to get there. But, start asking yourself in the headlines, does that headline begin with a presupposition as to what the problem is and what the solution is? And anybody who disagrees is a fill in the blank, and anyone who agrees is awesome. And I think as leaders, particularly as association staff, advise diverse boards with diverse perspectives, representing diverse audiences, to put ourselves in the position of an advocate of one path or another. I think is a less successful career track, arguably unethical. Our job is to help them decide. It's not to inform them what they should do based on our own beliefs or perceptions. And again, sector research, other forms of research help control for that. But I think that's where some groups have gotten in trouble, is they've lost focus of why they're there in the first place. Because a small group of people, your words, a few boards and members and staff decided we should be involved over here in things that a lot of members, maybe they don't care about, or they don't care about the same way. They don't share your solution to it. Okay. They think of the problem. They don't agree with your solution. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of boards, a lot of senior staff right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. And I think, too, I go back to some of those larger issues. If we're working on solving them, it's not actually solving the day-to-day problems that they are facing, our members. And so whether or not they believe it's an issue or whether or not they believe that our identified solution is a great response to the issue, it's not helping them day to day. And so, with limited time and resources and energy, are they willing to commit to the organization when they don't feel like you're solving their issue? Correct. You're off working to solve an issue, but it's not theirs, right?
Well, a great quote I got years ago from a friend of mine was, you can do anything you want, just not everything you want. So one of the purposes of strategic planning is to help you prioritize. One of the purposes of good research is to help you prioritize. So there's mechanisms to help you do that. But I think, like you and I think are both members of the American Society of Association Executives. Let's come up with a scenario that they now believe the most important thing is to solve the, climate change, or however you want to phrase it. Okay. I'm even personally supportive of that, but it doesn't impact me. If they choose not to do it, I'm not impacted. Like at the end of the day, my work, the stuff on my computer is all the same. My activities at work are the same. Okay. And so now I just have to say, well, how much of my money do I invested in it? Since I'm paying dues and things like that. At the end of the day, my personal life is no different. Okay. My work life is no different. And so I think what a lot of boards are doing is allowing themselves to be distracted by issues that aren't central to the individual needs of their members, because there's a media environment that demands it of them. But you're not obligated to respond to a media environment that demands you respond, because that's how the media get paid. Okay. You're not obligated to do a thing simply because a small group or cadre of your members have particularly strident opinions on it. And I'm not saying that's easy. I'm just saying you're not obligated to respond. you're not obligated to respond because something immediate, because there's immediacy to it, you know? And so there's a bias to action, I think, out of association executives and association leaders sometimes that doesn't serve them well. Because at the end of the day, a lot of associations are designed to be venues where we can discuss these issues and look at diverse perspectives on it, think about long-term implications, and do it within an environment that's more thoughtful. And that's not the media's environment. That's not the government's environment. Okay. Associations, if we can't do it in association, where can we have those conversations? And the more as associations, we limit or restrict those conversations because there are people, again, your words, a small group of board or staff who disagree, the more we'll take a segment of those association companies, a segment of those members, and they'll say, you know what, I think I'll just go somewhere else. And that's actually what's happened in the media environment. The media environment has bifurcated between targeted left and right, just use some generic terms. Because I find it really interesting on the New York Times, the thing that made the New York Times, the paper of record, was, I'll get his name wrong, it was Adolphus or something like that. Journalism at the time was basically all opinion journalism. You've probably heard the phrase yellow journalism and stuff like this. And papers would try to get people elected or fired and all this kind of stuff. But if you were a citizen who wanted to just figure out what was going on, it was really hard to find information. Like what's the issue that I'm supposed to be angry about or happy about? And so when it started the New York Times, he committed to this objective, what's the story kind of thing, the who, what, why, where, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why the New York Times one of the reasons the New York Times became so successful as an entity. Okay. No one would say that now about most media organizations. And so if you want to have some fun, pick a particularly hot button issue, go to any news entity, pick anyone you want, and try to get educated on what the issue is, not find out who's yelling at each other about it. And you will find it very, very hard.
It's not impossible. I mean,
it's not impossible. I tried this a couple of years ago. And I think my lesson is read the 7th paragraph. Cause I found this it was an article when President Trump first took office, and that was a chaotic time. A lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people did like it. I remember reading this article about how he had fired like all these EPA scientists or something like that. And he didn't campaign on that. And I'm like, where'd that come from? And so I read it in the 7th paragraph. There was a note from the administrator of the EPA. All those scientists are appointed by the president. They always get fired. He did a search and replace on Obama and Trump and did the exact same press release he'd done for Obama. But he got positioned is the Trump and doing was all this terrible thing when it was a search and replace by a government functionary. On stuff, everyone knew they were going to be, all the appointees go out when the new president comes in, regardless of whether you like him or not, and then they get reappointed if people on him. But the way that portrayed in that particular story was the Trump administration taking vengeance, on this stuff. It was a very hostilely oriented story. And so that was been my lesson, in which now you read to the 7th paragraph, and somewhere in there, there'll be a caveat about all of it. And again, any side of the political spectrum, any topic, that's just a particularly useful example for me. And I think that's what makes it tough right now to be a leader is very few people want to read to the 7th paragraph. They don't want to educate themselves in the nuances of issues. They want to, I hate it or I like it. It raises money or it costs money. That kind of simplistic binary is very easy to understand and easy to communicate. But in associations, we know the issues are not that simple. And the people are not that simple. And so to pretend they are is challenging. And you get around to that by creating spaces within the association community in particular to talk about the complexity of these issues and the nuances involved and inform it with information and understand it is not as cut and dried as the people writing the headlines would have you think. Because the world's a hard place, a complicated place, and a dynamic place. And to pretend it's simple is a mistake.
And I think it's only, my perspective as someone who works to navigate that is it becomes with truly infinite media, what feels like infinite media outlets.
And that's a good way of saying it.
It's just like who who do I trust? Who do I turn to? And, and what stock do I put in the conversations they're having?
Sure.
And I think going back to something you said a bit ago, but tying it into this issue, I I get the sense, and I've only worked for two associations. Um, I get the sense that a lot of times there may be some tension or conflict between trends that are impacting the association industry, stuff that I'm paid 40 hours or more a week to watch and pay attention to and respond to
Yep.
on behalf of members in a particular field. But there's also the issues and trends impacting that industry. The Sunbathers Association, right,
Yeah.
is not going to have the same issues that I'm facing
Right.
in my daily work. How do you set up systems and work groups, task force, whatever it may be, to really watch both of those and respond to them in an equitable way? Because as you said, not everyone is equally impacted by trends. Which ones, I guess, just outside of a strategic plan for the association, when something crops up even in the industry that you serve or the association industry, how do you balance those two
Sure.
and recognizing sometimes they may be at odds?
No, it's hard. That's what makes it fun.
Right. You
So
say
there's an
fun.
example. Well, but think about it. I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm a consulting shop, and there are things that are impacting market research in particular that are unrelated to the association sector, as an example, is how I would say it. There are things you can do in market research that we could theoretically do that we don't even pitch to associations. So the step one for you is to understand what's impacting your market. That's all you're saying. How do we understand what's impacting our market? And if you represent mining companies, so an association is a professional service organization, mining comes to a mining company. Yeah, you probably don't care about lease rates and interest rates in the same way as your members do. But if I'm, leasing $100 million worth of construction equipment, then interest rates start to matter to me. If the regulatory environment that disallows the shipment of a material or the building of a new plant in the United States impacts them, but not you. But it's your job as an association professional serving that market to understand that market. Okay. So half of this is you have to understand your market. Then half is you're a business yourself and I'm a business and I have to get a sense of, well, what allows me as a business serving that market to serve them more effectively. Okay. And so for you, that might be, tracking governance trends. It could be tracking things, again, AI, like anything that impacts content or stuff like this, or technical trends related to your website that would be important to you, but less important to your members, as an example. And then those are going to be shared trends that get all of it. They like the pandemic's a perfect example of that. The pandemic hit you, the pandemic hit the construction companies. Okay. And so there's things that hit you, there's things that hit him, and there's things that hit you both. And it's like a 3-circle Venn diagram. And so as a professional in your association, your mechanism to learn this is to go to things like ASA and the recent ICON meeting and the Inside Association execs to listen to others and how they're grappling with and what they're discovering and what vendors and other consultants and people like me say, I think this is coming down the pike. So that's your personal professional responsibility as a leader. And that knowledge is necessary because your goal is to structure your association to serve this other market effectively. So the other component is you have to know what you see on the market. And that's not an unrealistic expectation. So much of what we do, we do environmental scanning for virtually every client because the world within which they live and work impacts their needs. So if you're doing a strategic plan, we want to get a sense of what's the future look like. If we're doing membership modeling, we want to know what impacts their future. If we've got content education strategy clients, what impacts their needs for content education. And it's their personal and professional environment where they live, work, and play. And so that becomes the first question you answer in determining that. So then what might happen is, okay, the nature of our members are changing. That means we are going to have to be stronger in a particular area and reduce another area. And we did this during the pandemic. We downplayed face-to-face because we couldn't do it. And we expanded our digital presence. That's a perfect example of that internal trade-off on how to serve the market. You could serve them face-to-face, you serve them with digital. And that never stops. So when you think about your association's rollout of all this, it's kind of like, all right, here's what's impacting our members. How does that impact how we serve them? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does. Maybe it'll be 10 years from now and it's somebody else's problem, you know? And,
Right.
and then how does that impact your ability to serve? Wow. If we move from face to face to digital. So I'll just use this. We weren't lucky at Association Lever during the pandemic, but we were already a virtual company. And we were a virtual company because we couldn't serve clients in a centralized office, too much travel. You basically paid a bunch of money to have an MTF, and it made no sense. As a result of that, we were all cloud-based. Okay. So I can't afford an IT person sitting around doing stuff either. So we're all cloud-based. We're all virtual. Overwhelmingly market research, which we do a lot of, clearly is online now, electronic surveys, stuff like that. And that was a shift because paper surveys were collected worse data and were more expensive. So there's just phenomenal amounts. So we've gone through all these changes because of changes in the market research industry and because of the addition of cloud-based tech services and software service and stuff like that pre-pandemic. So when the pandemic hits, I don't have to figure out how to get people from work from home. We've already been doing it. I don't have to figure out how to do online research, but we're already doing it. So as a company, we had already made structural changes for completely separate reasons that left us well positioned for the pandemic. It was safer for everybody. They could stay home. So nobody got fired. In fact, we hired during the pandemic and stuff like that. So you got to think of how you structure yourself to serve. Your service is what's based on it's happening to your members. And that pandemic shift from face-to-face to digital is a perfect example of how you make that shift. And it was harder for some than others.
How often would you recommend associations are doing this work? Again, I go back to this idea. I've seen strategic plans out to 2030, and I'm just like, as a progressive millennial, I wonder, will the Earth even be here in 2030? But how can I have a question in my mind? How can you truly project out what the needs of the industry will be? And anyway, so I guess I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. How often should associations be conducting these conversations internally, externally to avoid mission creep? Because I heard from you, and whether you intended this or not, I heard from you that mission creep can kill an association.
Yes.
So I'm personally taking that away from this. How can associations avoid it without creating these, or would you recommend creating these large formal strategic plans that sort of guide the work? I don't know. I guess I'm just curious to your thoughts. How frequently should we be doing this, and how much should we invest in it?
As a strategic planning consultant, you should be doing it daily and invest all the money back.
All the money.
Just all of it. So I think I'm going to frame it differently. And I think, so one is people look at strategic planning as a project, and we have to start thinking of it as a process. So there may be a starting point of that process, the creation of let's say your first formalized strategic plan. So the first thing is, what's our process for understanding how the environment facing our members and our association is changing? And how do we translate that into understanding our goals, our strategies? And so first thing is, think of it as a circular process. Okay. Not as a project you do or a project you hire a consultant to do for you. Okay. The second thing to think differently is, the point isn't to create a document. The document is a discussion guide to make your conversations more productive. I've got done with strategic planning with a completely torn up, rewritten document, notes, and all this kind of stuff on paper. But the board knows they're in agreement because they've heard themselves in agreement. Okay. The document simply captures it and allows you to make those conversations productive. The third thing about strategic planning, it doesn't have to be hard or complicated or sophisticated. So we have the Association Laboratory Strategic Planning model is based on the assumption that you have to ask a couple of big questions. What is the world in which your members anticipate living and working? What do they want to accomplish as a result of that world? So you can align yourself with their goals. What's their relationship with you? And how is that relationship influenced by terms? Now, if you answer those 4 questions as a small association sitting around a table somewhere, you'll be better off than. And if you're a huge organization and you invest millions of dollars to answer those same 4 questions, it's the same 4 questions. So I think where the strategic planning industry has not served associations well is positing that it's a lot harder than it is and a lot more complicated than it is. And then it's based around a document, because that becomes the output of us as consultants. So we clearly want to produce documents, when at the end of the day, you could put people in your board around a dinner table and say, okay, what's the world going to look like 3 to 5 years from now? All right, what do our members trying to get done as a result of that? No, okay, well, how are we a platform for their success? Like, what's the relationship with us? Oh, okay. I think it's this. I think it's that, and then, well, are there other people out there who influence it? Yeah. Or no, whatever the question is. You get those 4 questions answered and you're a long way at that. And then the next board meeting, you ask the same 4 questions. And now, the larger and more complicated your organization, the more professional guidance starts to help you. Okay. As an example, I can fix the front step on my house that is broken. I have a carpenter doing the deck. If I was going to build the garage, I'd have a design, I'd have a designer, contractor, et cetera. So the more you scale up the complexity of your organization, the more that matters. But when we do strategic planning, a large, complicated strategic plan or a smaller strategic plan, we answer the same questions. It's just the scale of how we answer them. So with the American College of Surgeons, it's an annual process we call the Voice of the Surgeon program, multiple studies. We talk to the decision makers of what they're trying to get done, all that kind of stuff. For a much smaller organization, we rely on our internal knowledge and do it much less expensively, but it's the same questions. And I think that's the mistake people make. They think it's harder than it is and more complicated than it is, because us on the consulting side get paid for doing hard, complicated things, not simple things. And that's why our model is designed to scale. And you just tell me how much time you got and how much money you got. I answer those same questions every single time.
I also feel like I have a lot of peers in the association world who have entered into the association world from the industry. And I think it's very tempting to approach our work. I'm guilty of this, Dean, just so you know. I think it's very tempting to approach our work with a passion for the industry that we're serving. And so we carry those biases with us at all times. Some we know about, some we don't. And I think a third party, I've had good experience working with a third party to challenge those, to remove my voice and actually understand, the voice of the member from someone I trust to
Sure.
do the research and the science behind it.
Well, it goes back to this kind of just how do you take an objective agnostic approach to the issues? And then you can decide if you care or not. It doesn't take away your ability to promote something or resist something. But step 1, to properly understand something, you have to say, at the end of the day, I don't care. I just want to know what the issue is and understand it. Then I'll decide whether it's positive or negative. Then I'll decide if I want to promote it or resist it. Okay. Step 1 is always understanding. That's like when I work with our team, like how you develop an analyst or strategist. Step 1 is you don't care. Step 1 is you have to understand the issue in depth from a variety of perspectives and a variety of sides. Then you start making decisions after that. The other thing, I would go back to this, passion for the industry is a feature of our profession. It is not a bug. And it separates so much what association execs do relative to some customer service rep at United or Amazon.
Sure.
And it's almost comical when I watch my friends on LinkedIn, how passionate they are about some obscure industry or profession somewhere, but it's not us who. That's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
The people connection. You're helping those companies and their leaders be more successful. You're curing cancer. My story from earlier in my 20s. And that's what makes our profession more interesting and fun. Do we have to control for our enthusiasm? Yeah, but you have to control for it anyway. That's what the leader would do regardless. I'd rather control for enthusiasm than trying to figure out how to create it.
And I will say, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because I also feel like it's authenticity. And, when you think about the way the world is headed, authenticity is rising as a commodity almost in what we, and a value that we expect from our organizations and our companies. And I think that's built into the model of the association workforce almost is, we do bring in those. So I got to be honest, I just looked at the time. We've been talking almost 55 minutes, I think it is. And so I wanted to just, although it feels like 10, I mean, it's been
fun. No complaints.
Yeah. So to wrap up, I'd love to hear your thought. I anticipate people came to this podcast looking for some nuggets of wisdom, some inspiration, some empowerment, but also some tangible things that we should be paying paying attention to in our industry that we can take back to our leadership teams or we can take back to our staff teams to say, hey, Dean says this is really important to watch out for over the next 5 years? What are those things? What are some upcoming trends that we should be aware of?
Okay. I think that there's a couple of things that are going to shape our business environment. One is the reduction, if not elimination, of barriers between the movement of money, of information, and via things like Zoom competencies. I'm a small firm. I can hire somebody from any place in the world to work for me. We're currently talking to a person in the Middle East, serving us for clients. That's how easy it is. Many associations historically do a circle around a group of companies or people within a jurisdiction. I'm an Indiana society to something. I'm an American society. Okay. Well, how do those geographic boundaries influence you if money, people, and information don't care about it? And that means everyone can serve your folks just like you, but that means you can serve other people too, for opportunities, not just threats. So I think that's probably the most substantial thing that will impact the association business model. The second thing is the COVID-19 disruption. I will not underestimate and do not in any way downplay the health aspects of it. But what it really disrupted was people's historical behaviors. You have members that have not built their relationship with you face-to-face meetings. They don't care about your annual conference. They've never been to it. It's not the critical thing. They can't wait to see all their friends. Okay. We have people that have discovered they don't need their association. They spend a couple years without it, maybe. I use an example from my own company. We did 2 years out of one ASAE meetings. Everything was fine. The only difference was I saved a lot of money. It cost us probably $12,000 to put 4 people in that meeting last year, as opposed to just keeping the money. Are we better off? Hard to decide. So when you eliminate boundaries and when you disrupt historical patterns of behavior, what you do is you throw everybody into the same pool, which creates a particularly savage competitive environment for associations and their members. And what that means is, as an association, you have to know exactly who you're designing yourself to serve and the world in which they live in. And you have to know what's your unique roles to them, given the alternatives in the marketplace, which is why I'm concerned about mission creep, driven by smaller cadres of staff or board or members who want to use the platform as a voice for their views, not as a platform for members' success. And I think that's where people are getting distracted right now and being challenged by that. And it will be interesting to see how we as a sector navigate that over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, Dean, I got to express all of our gratitude from all of us at ISAE. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh, my pleasure.
I anticipate people have listened to this and said, oh my gosh, we need Dean's help. How can people get a hold of you? Where can people find you? What's the best way to say, Dean, help us?
There's a couple of things. One is associationlaboratory.com is a corporate website. We have a knowledge center with a wide variety of educational resources. The Looking Forward dashboard is the leading source of sector research in the association sector. It is absolutely free to access it. You can customize it to your needs. You can download it and use it with your board. And I would be remiss if I didn't say my corporate blog is called From My Seat at the Bar. And it is an irreverent, if not outright comical take on the issues facing the association sector. I think my favorite one still is how my wife called me fat, and that's about content strategy. But again, I encourage you to read on myself, dwest at associationlaboratory.com, or anybody on the team. Happy to help. There's a lot of complicated and challenging issues. There's a lot of really cool opportunities for associations too. I am not in any way pessimistic about us as a sector. I think there's never been a better time for our sector to take more leadership in the discussion of some of the issues you and I spoke about today, and to do so honestly and positively. And again, I go back to my story. That's a hell of a lot more fun being the executive generation to do that than being the guy who sells soap. And so I'm looking forward to what we accomplish, frankly. And I'm sure we will be successful at it.
I love the optimism. Well, thank you again, Dean. So appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed this episode of You Should Hear This. If you have any questions, topics, themes, ideas that you'd like answered, or future topics that you'd like us to explore, please send us an email at info@isae.org. Thank you, listener, for your leadership of your associations, and I'll see you over on the next episode of You Should Hear This.